Steeler Fury. SteelerFury.com.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of the Pittsburgh Steelers show on the SteelerFury.com podcast. I am Wil Masisak, also known as Bradshaw the Ben, sometimes as Accidental Zen on Twitter, and with me, Korey Karbowsky, the true star of the show. He is also he's hired for his looks. I'm hired for my disposition. And we are here tonight as episode 2 of this week's PreDraft Extravaganza series of 5 draft shows that we're doing on the SteelerFury.com pod. And this one, last night's episode, we talked about the Steelers draft needs and kind of what they've done in the offseason, and very Steelers focused. This one is going to be a bit more general draft focused. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the top prospects who we like as the top prospects, maybe think are a little bit underrated, or some that we don't like as much that are a little bit overrated. And then maybe we'll talk a little bit later about some draft narratives, like maybe will a certain quarterback get traded or retire and stuff like that. So, Korey, what's up? How are you tonight?
Oh, I'm doing great, Will. Just got a lift in for our practice, took a shower, and now I'm just hanging out in my bathrobe on the balcony.
Florida man. That's all I really have to say. Are you tired of the draft yet? Because this is the pre-draft extravaganza of a 5-show series of talking about the draft this week every night. Is it tiresome yet? I think it's still pretty exciting for a few more days.
I'm not really tired of necessarily the podcasting. I think I am tired of trying to, crack down on some of these SEC O-linemen that, I've never heard before. Then I see them mocked in the 3rd round, and now I've got to go watch some Joe Schmo from Mississippi State or something. No offense to any of their linemen. But, the film grinding's getting a little tiresome, but everything else is still a lot of fun.
You better be careful. I think aren't you playing Mississippi State sometime soon?
Yeah. First game of the year.
There are interns out there, as we know, who do nothing but scour social media for bulletin board material, so you got to be careful. Tonight we're going to talk about some of the top prospects in the draft, maybe who we think is a little bit overrated, maybe who we think is definitely underrated, or just names that we're puzzled about why they are considered to be high draft prospects. I know you have a couple you think are a little bit overrated. When you look at mock drafts that are everywhere right now, and you keep seeing a name in there, who is the name that you're like, well, I don't understand why this person's in here. I don't think they're a first-round pick.
So in terms of the first round, Brian Bresee from Clemson's one of them. He tested well. He's very highly touted out of high school. He's a higher rated D tackle than Jalen Carter. And I played against Jalen Carter in high school, and I'm not sure what in the world warranted that rating over Jalen Carter. However, there's something there, but when you're looking at one D tackle, it's not a super valued archetype in the NFL right now. You don't see a ton of round 1 D tackles, and if you do, it's Jordan Davis type and, Jalen Carter type. But with Bresee, I just don't see the knockback. I don't see the anchor that you really want out of an interior D lineman. That's one guy that I see in the first round that I think is riding on the coattails of his high school rankings.
Well, as you're preaching to the choir, because, I've been saying for years now that, you get that ranking coming out of high school, and you spend your entire college career. If you have a high ranking, you spend your whole college career, you'd have to work at it really hard to get downgraded from that high rating, right? I mean, you'd have to just, get arrested and be terrible and get injured, maybe, and then maybe you drop down a little bit. Whereas if you come out with a poor rating, you could be a superstar for 4 years in college, and it doesn't necessarily translate to people thinking you're any better. They just think you're an overachiever, Mm-hmm. For me, the guy is, I don't think he's a terrible player, but for months now, and that's just something you and I have talked about, Michael Mayer, the tight end from Notre Dame, is a name that is very frequently thrown out there in the first round. He might be, my 3rd, 4th, 5th tight end picked in this class. And granted, there's a lot of tight ends in the class, and everybody's looking for something different. Some people are looking for a receiver. Some people are looking for a blocker. Some people are looking for somebody who's good at both, but not necessarily great at either. But I think he kind of falls into that category. He's not great at either. He can do both to a degree, and I think that's why he's caught the fancy of people who follow the draft. But I almost feel like you're more valuable as a first round tight end pick if there's something that you do that's excellent. You're a really good blocker like Darnell Washington, who we might get to later, or you're a really good receiver. That was the kind of thing that bumps you up in draft. But being sort of good at both, I don't know. Maybe it does. I sort of feel like that player has a role in the NFL, but not necessarily as a first round value. Got somebody else?
Yeah, and the kind of one other one is for me. Well, for about Mayer, I want to say is one thing that really concerns me about that is, you look at his film. He's not going to be a dynamic one-on-one winner. Like, he's not going to be killing linebackers. He's not going to be killing safeties. He'll get some wins, but he's not going to be a more than 4 or 5 targets a game kind of guy. But what really makes me nervous is that he's had some issues finding the soft spot in zones, and that's where a guy like that, real big guy with soft hands, that's where he's got to make his money. And there's been a few instances on film where he just doesn't know where to settle down on the mesh, doesn't know where to settle down on the spot, and he runs himself into some trouble, and he might make a crazy catch. But in the NFL, instead of a 215-pound linebacker hitting you over the middle, it's going to be 235. Like, those are going to be plays that are going to be a whole lot tougher to make. Quarterbacks are going to start turning it down. They throw behind, ball gets tipped. I mean, there's so much that can go wrong when you're just not in sync and finding the right spot. So that's one thing that concerns me a little bit about Michael Mayer. Another guy, and I'm sure, I kind of picked him because I think we disagree on him, Will, for me is Zach Charbonnet. And I've seen some people, not player comparison, but compare his running style to Franco, where he's a very vertical runner. And when I see Zach Charbonnet, I see this most recent year of Leonard Fournette. And that is not a bad player. There's value in that. I'm personally one who likes a lot of the big backs, likes guys who can pass block, likes guys who can get in there and get their nose dirty, get you 1 or 2 yards. However, when looking at him compared to a lot of the other running backs in this class, I don't see the dynamic ability. I think his cuts are a little stiff. And I mean, if you want Leonard Fournette from 2022, I mean, like I said, that's a fine player. He can win you some games, not maybe on his own, but he's a winning player. But for him to be running back 2, running back 3, where I see a lot of places, I'm just not sure I see that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd have him that high. I was making a stylish comparison, not necessarily comping how good a player I thought he was. I just think there's something about the way that he navigated traffic as being something similar to Franco and to my eye. But yeah, the guy. This is a bigger question. What is valuable in running backs as far as the NFL is concerned? I think the NFL, compared to, this is one of those areas where the NFL as a whole is much more fascinated with a certain skill set of running backs than draft Twitter or people that are fans that follow the draft. Because I think, fans that follow the draft, they're really into, running backs who have power and are really good runners, and they're into linebackers that can come downhill and make big hits. And those two things, I think, are antiquated ideas about both positions in terms of what's most valuable. Not that either of those skills is not valuable, but most valuable is a running back who can be really great in the passing game, particularly as it relates to if you're a good pass protector and you can run routes, not just leak out of the backfield. Those players, I think, have a much more premium value. Like Alvin Kamara is worth more than a running back that's in for 2 downs and comes out on 3rd down. Even though Alvin Kamara is not the best, pure running back you'll ever see. To that end, I like Bijan Robinson a lot. I do think he's the best running back in this class. But what I'll say is I'll call him a little bit overrated from the standpoint of people that are having him go top 10 in this draft. Because I don't think he's quite as much of an athletic freak as, say, Saquon Barkley. And I'm not sure Saquon Barkley is worth the 1st round pick. If you look at what his value is in the NFL to a team that, really needed to rely on him because they didn't have a star quarterback, in that circumstance, it was still very underwhelming in terms of wins and losses and what value he really gave to the offense and scoring. It's a great thing to have a running back, and everybody needs one. And when you're in the 4-minute drill late in the game and you want to salt a game away, it's great to have one that can take over a game. But I just feel like that's no matter how good a running back you are, it would be a stretch. And if you're not even the best running back at all phases, and like you're just a guaranteed superstar, it's hard for me to imagine that you'd be in the top 10.
Exactly. And it's something where it throws me off because I see a team like the Falcons get mocked with Bijan a lot. And I mean, they had a top 10 running game last year with Tyler, last name's blanking on me,
Algier, yeah. From
Algier, Tyler Algier, Cordell Patterson. And I see people saying like, if they had Bijan, it could be that much better. And I just don't follow that line of thinking just because if they already have a successful running game and they have many of the glaring holes that the Atlanta Falcons do, I think we're taking a running back top 8. No, it could be Walter Payton. I think taking a running back top 8 just wouldn't be smart in today's climate, simply because they don't need it to run their offense. They need a quarterback. They need more receivers. They need pass rush. I mean, their list could go on and on for that team.
Yeah.
But I agree with that, where Bijan is maybe solid value in the 20s, but it has to be to the right team. But top 10, there's going to be players that could give a much greater impact to your team.
I feel like running back is a luxury pick for a team that has basically everything. We don't really have any glaring needs, and we can upgrade running back. Then it's an excellent pick, really. Or it can be an excellent pick. I mean, the Chiefs of a couple of years ago did that. They ended up never using the guy.
Picked the wrong guy, though.
I mean, everybody at the time was like, "Yeah, what a great choice for them," because they need a guy, who can step right in and so on and so forth. That's interesting. I mean, I just feel like I'm clearly on team. No running back in the first round is really a good value, but to me, best player available has to include the positional value of what really makes a difference in NFL games, and it just doesn't make a difference the way that it once did, or even does in college. When you got a good O-line and a good running back, you can beat a lot of teams. You don't need to be too magical or too dynamic as an offense to win a lot if that's what you have. But in the NFL, it's very difficult to get away with that because the games stay too close, and most teams, even bad teams, can figure out a way to, when you have a lead, to make it close, and then you're worried about, restarting your offense after a while, so et cetera, et cetera. Let me ask you this. So right now there's 4 quarterbacks mocked in the first round. People are starting to, get that itch to put, a 5th or 6th quarterback in the first round. Do you think all of the guys that are projected right now to be in the first round, this would be Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, Byron Young, not Byron Young, Bryce. Bryce is CJ Young and Bryce Young. Yeah, sorry. There are 2 Byron Youngs in the draft, and the quarterback is not one of them. Anyway, do you think those guys all belong in the first round? Do you think there's any worth to the people who are like maybe Hooker should be in the first round? What are your feelings on the quarterback situation? I know the one you like the most, but I'm wondering, do you think they all deserve to be
I think all 4 deserve to be roughly in the top 10. I mean, I don't think it'd be a crime if really you could pick apart a flaw for each one of them. And all 4 quarterbacks have their ugly spots. But I think any of them could slide to like 15, 16, and it wouldn't be some crime against the state like some might act. But I mean, they could go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I don't think there's an issue with that either. I mean, teams need QBs. I mean, that's one thing. NFL is always going to need QBs. They're barely filling out. I mean, let's call it 20. Are there 20 good QBs right now? So, I mean, when you look at that, you can't really put a cost on drafting a quarterback high. You're throwing darts at the board. But with Hendon Hooker, it's going to matter what you think about him if he belongs in the first or not. He's a good player. He's a good college player. And I don't think he'll necessarily be a bad NFL player. But when you're looking at him, you got to factor in there's 3 glaring red flags. So first thing is his age. He's 25 years old. That is old. Like, that's old for an NFL quarterback, especially one who came onto the scene late, kind of like our boy Kenny Pickett. But then if you stack that on top towards ACL, I can speak firsthand. It takes a little bit to come back from that. Like you are not guaranteed to be able to do what you could do before. But third, we want to say that it doesn't matter if you play in an air raid anymore, and I'll say that shouldn't be high on the scouting priority list. But when you're looking at a 25-year-old who hasn't been asked to make any NFL drops, and there's some plays where his offense isn't running more than 2 routes. I mean, if you look at some Tennessee games, especially on a lot of third and shorts, to save their receivers, they'll only have 2 receivers on the left side run a route. 2 on the right will just stand on the line. They don't move, they don't block, they don't do anything. So they're not even asking him to make full field reads on somebody's third. It's 1-2 run. And although that doesn't tell the whole story, that's something where, for me personally, I would not take him anywhere near as high as he's being projected right now, just because age, scheme, limitations that you're going to have to overcome in the NFL, and then coming off an injury. Just 3 red flags are pretty tough to overcome. I don't see him going in the first because of that, but I could see him going somewhere in the middle of the second.
Yeah. I actually, I'm a fan of his. I had him, I thought 2 years ago he should have come out as a developmental player at that point, somebody that hadn't necessarily shown that much. But I felt like at Virginia Tech, he got a raw deal, and that, because they didn't really exploit him and show him off, that people didn't see, well, here's a guy that has size and can move and has a great arm, et cetera. Right now, the way things evolved at Tennessee, he showed a lot, and there were things that he did very good as a college football player. He's got one elite skill. He throws an amazing deep ball. He might be the best deep ball thrower in the class. And if you match that up with a team that's really what they want to do, like the Raiders of old, then or somebody that has deep receivers who are good deep threats, but they don't have a quarterback that can get them the ball, then yeah, I could see that being an option for somebody to try it out and see if it works. If he can plug right in and catch on quickly at his age and stage of development, that's great. But yeah, I tend to agree with you. And I 100% agree with what you said about the 4 quarterbacks, that each one of them has, you could absolutely pick them apart. And I think the landing spot will matter as much for the quarterbacks in this class as it has ever mattered. I don't see that there's anybody in there that's a transcendent talent that's on the cusp of becoming a superstar tomorrow. And it doesn't matter where they go, they'll figure out a way to make it work. But yeah, that landing spot will really make a difference, because if Will Levis goes to a place where he's not surrounded with offensive minds who can take that talent and direct it in the right place, or if Anthony Richardson doesn't go to a place where they can, I don't want to say fix him, but where they can build him into a quarterback, that's difficult. If Bryce Young goes to a place where they can't protect him, or he's asked to move in places in ways that'll put him in danger on the edge, that's not going to work very well, like behind a really bad offensive line or something like that. And Stroud is like, I think if you put him in a team that has really good talent at the skill position, like if he walks into a situation where they have the offensive line and receivers, I could see him making that work. He could be better than even he looked in college. Maybe that last game in college is more indicative of what he could be. So all of that's great, but man, if he's in a system where he has to master the mental part of the game in terms of the reaction, the stuff that's not even like you necessarily learn, it's just repetition and practice and having that quick reaction clock. That's the thing that is the concern with him. Yeah, so they could all end up in good situations and be good. It could be a nice quarterback class, or they could end up in bad situations, and we're going to be on with 2024. I think the thing you mentioned about quarterbacks, that the NFL has never seemed to find enough of them. Watching the XFL and USFL and AAF the last few years has really brought something to focus in my mind, and that is one of the reasons the NFL has so much trouble developing quarterbacks or ending up with enough good quarterbacks is they get stuck financially, and their reputation is built on, I drafted this guy in the first round and we paid him a lot of money and it's our job to make it work with him. And they will ride that guy into the dust. They will just throw good money after bad. It's just like the sunk cost of getting that quarterback in the door makes it so that you can't bail on him. And it's brave for a team like Arizona a couple of years ago to bail on their Josh Rosen and switch to Kyler Murray, but they did that because everybody in the organization who had a stake in drafting Josh Rosen was gone. But in the XFL or USFL, it's kind of like, not even if the quarterback doesn't do great, even if he does okay, they bring another guy in and they give him a shot. And they're like, well, let's see what it looks like with this guy running it, or maybe he does certain things better than the other guy, whatever. And the net result is they don't linger on guys who have reputations for too long. They switch midstream from guys with bigger reputations into guys that no one's ever heard of who can play better. And I just feel like the NFL probably has guys who have matriculated through practice squads and second and third string in NFL games that are just never really going to get their chance to unseat a really bad quarterback who was drafted high. So maybe they'll get some. Maybe there will be some development in these lower leagues, and they'll bring in some of these guys and give them more of a shot. But I just feel like the money will determine that.
Yeah.
It's never going to get away from that. Anyway, on my soapbox, let's talk about some underrated guys. We were into the overrateds. I know a couple that you like a lot, so I'm going to give you the floor.
I mean, I'm just going to rattle off a few of my guys, and then you can just spit questions out at me for them. So, Chris Toth, Aurora University. Bryce Peterson, Nevada, center.
We're getting way deep. I meant underrated for the sort
of
the
first round.
Let's put it this way.
Second round.
Let's put it this way. Guys that people think are second or third rounders that you feel like are better than the guys who are being talked about in the first. And then we can get into some. I'll give you your shot at
my deep sleepers. Sure. Okay. Well, first things first. Darnell Washington. That guy is a legitimate sixth tackle for your offensive line. He's got rack ability. He blocks like an offensive lineman. I mean, that's not an understatement. If he moved to offensive tackle, he'd be just fine. You might need a year or two to work with him with some pass pro technique, but he moves people like a lineman would. And I'll let you take it over, Will, because I know you love him also. I mean,
well, I was going to say I feel like he's such a good blocker that he's a little bit underrated as a receiver. I feel like when you see him, he has a knack for that thing that you were talking about with Michael Mayer. He has a knack for finding those spots in the defense, and has he does not look like the ball is a foreign object like some tight ends do. It's like I'll catch it if it's right to me, but it's always going to be a little bit of an adventure. And I feel like with Washington, it's he's got great hands. I don't really understand. Like I can understand somebody saying Dalton Kincaid, for instance, from Utah, might be a better for your taste in tight ends if you are a certain kind of team, and what you're looking for is Travis Kelce. Like sure, like he fits that mold a little bit better. But yeah, if I'm a team that wants a tight end that can, when he's in the game, you can't be thinking, run or pass. So he's not a tell when he comes in the game. And then secondly, if you start thinking at all about, it's red zone and maybe he's going to run an out, some kind of a pass pattern, you're just going to get your ear holed by him as he blows by you, blocking three guys in one play, right? So in a way, I feel like a guy like that is he's a mismatch problem. That's what tight ends should be. They should be a receiving mismatch or a two-way mismatch or a blocking mismatch in his case. And so I feel like you just can't play normal defense against guys that are mismatches like that. You have to account for what they can do that's different. And
the one thing that I think is really impressive with him is if you drop him into the NFL and he doesn't improve his game. Let's just say that. So he could be a weapon in the tight end screen game. He could be a weapon in the flats. Anything short where he can just go straight line and go, because he's not a crazy route runner. I mean, he's a bit tight hip, but he's 6'7" and 270 pounds. I mean, not really a shock. But the thing where I see it is that there's so much untapped potential on contested balls, because Georgia half the time he was running wide open up the seam, and then he's blasting some 200-pound safety He's running a 4.6, 4.7, and he's 270 pounds. But if you can find a way for him to get to even 50%, like on 50-50 balls, like an actual 50% where he's bringing them in and he's just working it, there's not going to be a safety or linebacker who can guard him. He's too big. So you can work him on fades from the tight end spot. You can split him out wide and have him blocking screens, or you could just have it fade off. If he grows at all in that aspect of his game, he could be top. Think George Kittle. Yeah, maybe not as crafty as a route runner, but that level of dominance in the run and pass game.
Yeah. So, and I think that's the thing. As running backs become less valuable, tight ends become more valuable in a way. That's the bigger. Yeah. Like you think about, just to take two, Kansas City and San Francisco, since you mentioned Kittle, and you realize that, the tight ends on those teams are way more important to their team than whoever lines up at running back. No offense. So yeah, I think that's more. I would take Darnell Washington ahead of Bijan Robinson.
I would too.
I think Bijan Robinson is a great player, but just value-wise, there's no comparison between what they could do for you. Let's talk a little bit about these tackles. Tackles always go higher than people think they're going to go, but it just feels like, once again, since high school, that Paris Johnson, and Broderick Jones have just been destined to be that either the top tackle picked or one of the top two tackles picked or whatever. But I know there's a couple of guys that I like, and I know in particular one that you love. That I'm sure you would call underrated, although it's like if you keep at this long enough, these guys that we think is underrated, that we've been championing for months, are now starting to come up boards a little bit, and now they're making appearances in mock drafts. But tell me about the offensive tackle that you like in this class.
I've been banging on the table for Darnell Wright for months now. Just to break down his game, it's high praise, but it's really stunning how similar it looks. As his pass sets look strikingly similar to Lane Johnson. So he explodes out of his stance. And what's really impressive is, a lot of these guys, and Broderick Jones is a bit of a victim of this, where, it's the same kind of pass set every time. That you're getting a 45-degree set, and his feet kind of get stuck in mud in the back. Broderick Jones is a good athlete, so he kind of gets away with it. But Darnell Wright, he's got a jump set, which is very, very good. He's battle-tested. Will Anderson, B.J. Ojulari, Habanuk, Baldonado. That dude's a pass-rushing fiend. And he shut down all three with jump sets. He's flying back. There was a set where he jumped off his left, landed on his left again, flew backwards, and cut off the speed rush on B.J. Ojulari, who weighs like 230, 240 at playing weight. So he's flying that back in there. And then the big thing with him is that a lot of guys, in college, and this is the issue with Paris Johnson, they punch with two hands. They're a victim to getting chopped. They punch wide. Darnell Wright consistently strikes well with one hand. You chop, he chops you back. He's just so technically advanced compared to all the other tackles in the class. Even Skoronski. Skoronski is the one who gets high praise for his technique and everything. And Darnell Wright's past him. And one thing that people don't really notice about him either, everyone talks about, Paris Johnson, underclassman, Anton Harrison, underclassman, Broderick Jones, underclassman. Everyone except Anton Harrison by 5 months. He's younger than every single other tackle that is talked about. Yet somehow, because he played 4 years, no one really looks at it. Right. So he doesn't get the underclassman label, even though, if you're the same age as everyone, right, you played one more year, that's a big plus. So Darnell Wright's been my tackle one for a little while. You see the group talk about Paris Johnson and Broderick Jones, but if you just look at the film, I really don't see the argument for Darnell Wright over those other guys.
And he looks good at left tackle as well. That's the other thing that people. Here's what I think. I think if you at any time played right tackle in college, then you're pigeonholed into that right tackle forever. The thing about playing right tackle in college is it's because of the game, the differences in the game being more spread out. A lot of times, the bigger pass rush threat comes from the right side. That's frankly, I think it might be harder to play than ever in college football. And it doesn't really, the skill set isn't really that much different. It's just more like, are you somebody that can flip sides, or are you somebody that's better on one side or the other? Or in Darnell Wright's case, is the guy the other tackle on your team better on the left side than he is on the right, and then you don't care.
Mm-hmm.
It works out that way. But you mentioned his age, same age as a tackle that I like. I like Darnell Wright a lot. We've had this argument back and forth, like we would have a very difficult time trying to come to a consensus, because I think DeJuan Jones is as good a certain kind of tackle. Let's put it this way. He is not a finesse tackle. He is, in a way, more old school. He's like a little bit more of like an old school right tackle, but he's not only is he massive, that's the thing that everybody wants to talk about, but he's extremely athletic. He was a high level basketball player that had to be basically talked into being a football player. And you can see that movement skills on the tape. He does stuff that tackles who are 300 pounds struggle to do. He doesn't make it look easy, and not just skip pulling, like one gap over to get out in front of an outside run or a screen or something, but they were on the regular had him pulling completely across the formation from right to left and leading sweeps. And just like, imagine this, your surprise as a safety or a linebacker coming to fill on a sweep, and suddenly this mountain just comes out of nowhere and is running full speed into you. Like, that is just a bad day at the office. So I feel like if you're a team that is not necessarily going to do a bunch of drop backs and vertical throws all day long, but you're going to have a quick game in the pass game, and you're going to run play action, and you're going to run, the running game is really important part of your offense. I feel like that's a guy as good as some of these other tackles are at those things, that he fits that to a T. And I think he's 5 days older than Wright, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think he's
4 days.
Because I know you're going to throw that argument at me. He's like, well, Wright's younger than him too. But yeah, I feel like I think Wright and DeJuan Jones. Just one last thing. I think one of the reasons, not only did they play right tackle in their senior year, having played left tackle before that definitely pigeonholes them a little bit. But the other sneaky thing is they're big. They're both over 330, and I feel like evaluators who are not playing against them evaluate big players differently. They don't look like they're moving as fast necessarily, even though they're covering ground at a higher rate of speed. They don't, you don't appreciate what it is to get around someone with that kind of a wingspan. So even if he's not perfect with his feet, he can generally get in position. Both of them, are that way. They're really big dudes. So I feel like that's a big, big guys tend to get, sort of underrated in general.
Yeah, and me and Will, I have Darnell 1, DeJuan 2. Will has DeJuan 1, Darnell 2. So it's if I had to call it, I'd say 52-48 in favor of Darnell for me, and I'm sure Will's probably close to that number in favor of DeJuan. It's not to say that these other tackles are bad. Like if we took Paris at 17 and we took Broderick at 17, I'm not going to walk out of the draft upset. But I feel like that's one area where a lot of people, especially, I'm not expecting everyone to know the ins and outs of O-line play, not expecting everyone to go watch 5 games of film. Not everyone has to be as much of a draft sicko as I am. But I just think that's one area where a lot of people take the evaluators at their word, and the numbers look good for Broderick and Paris test, but then you think DeJuan and Darnell are pigeonholed at right, but then you don't know Darnell played an entire season at left, and DeJuan used to play left for Ohio State, not even just in high school, for Ohio State. So that's one thing where you got to dive a little deeper to find these guys, which is where I hope that listening to this podcast helps expand the views a little bit past, Kuiper and Mayock and all those guys.
A little bit. Just quickly, I'm going to make a statement about the wide receivers in this class and to see if you agree. I think there's some good wide receivers at the top of this class that, once again, have a specific skill maybe that's really good. But I just wonder if once you get past the first 2 or 3 guys, it just feels like there's not much difference between the guys or the third or fourth wide receiver that gets picked in this class and the 15th wide receiver in this class. Feel like they're both pretty good, not necessarily great, but they seem very similar to me. Do you feel like there's anybody wide receivers in this class who stand out to you that are better than advertised? that should be going, first or second or third?
So two guys that I've been warming up to more and more lately, because I mean, before I would have said no, I would have said there's a big cluster, but one guy in particular is Jonathan Mingo, and Will's liked him a bit longer than I have. But the thing that you got to realize with Jonathan Mingo is he's a good route runner. He's not a dynamic route runner, I don't think, but he's good. But the thing that you got to see with him is if you think of how Juju used to play for the Steelers, where he'll go inside, he'll catch the dirty balls, he'll eat the hits from the linebackers. Then he's also a tough blocker. If you take a guy like that and an elite athlete, you put that together, I'm just not sure how a guy like that's going to fail. So when I see these reports about Mingo, because I watch, you watch the highlights and you just watch his games at face value, and you're like, man, like, I don't know if this is a first round receiver, because he's not making insane catches a lot of the time. He's not,
He's not
killing
flashy.
dudes. Yeah, he's not getting 5 yards of separation. But I mean, a guy who's athletic as he is, and he does the little things. He blocks hard. He makes the catches. That's a guy who really stands out to me, where I'm not sure how that guy doesn't have a successful career. And then another one for me is Parker Washington, and I'm sure you can talk about him a little more, Will, because I know that's a guy you also love.
Well, I mean, I feel like I saw Mingo, and like the first moment I saw Mingo, I just thought, here's a Steelers receiver. It just like looks like a guy that's the kind of guy that they have brought in and that they like and that does well for them. And I feel in a way about Parker Washington. The thing about him is, he's not nearly going to be the flashiest receiver out of this class, but he has the best hands. He's an extremely dependable target. Mingo, for all of his excellent points, one thing about him is he wasn't a big dominator. He wasn't like the man in his offense that got all the tough throws and was always the target when they needed something. And Parker Washington has at least a year of that, if not as a possession receiver, even more than that for Penn State, and playing with a really bad quarterback. So that the combination of things, I just feel like he's going to be a dependable receiver who's going to have a very consistent career. And that to me is okay, but maybe he isn't your number one receiver, but he's a 2 or a 3 for a team. You're going to be in pretty good shape. And for a long time, I think that's a pretty good choice. There's a guy that I think, JSN, is going to be great at what he does. I don't think he's ever going to be like a, Justin Jefferson, does it all, downfield threat, gets to play for you on third down, et cetera. But as a sort of a guy out of the slot who's going to be pretty much impossible to cover, and really good at making plays out from the slot, I think he's going to be very good at that. The guy I think has the most superstar potential in the whole class, probably, and also has a pretty significant flaw, is Zay Flowers from Boston College. When I watch him play, I think if you only saw his highlights, you'd be like, oh, that's Antonio Brown. Like he has the swagger, and he can make not contested plays, but more importantly, like he gets the ball, he's dangerous, he's going to score. He's making a lot out of not very much once he has the ball in his hands. All that stuff's great. He has drops. He has issues with making easy plays sometimes, and maybe sometimes for receivers, that's a thing that they get past. They get to the NFL and it's more regulated, and they're catching balls, 1,000 balls from a judge machine every day. It's something that can be, sort of smoothed over. But it's not nothing. If you can't get open, you definitely can't play. If you can get open but you can't catch it, you may never get the opportunity to be successful. So I think getting open and catching the ball, that's pretty much the job description, right?
Yeah.
So that worries me a little bit about him. But if I really needed not just a receiver to complement my team, but I needed to take a home run swing for somebody in the class, that's who I would say. There just seems to be more home run potential in him, but it's not a finished product.
I mean, that's a guy where, this fit just popped in my head, and it's a popular one, but an offense like the Patriots would so desperately need a guy like that, someone who can consistently get open, do stuff with the ball in his hands. He's right there with JSN for me. He's that dynamic. He's that good of a route runner. He has that good of hands and body control. Yep. It's, he's not a perfect prospect. He's small, and, there's some small drops issues. But if you're an offense where you just don't have pop, And we're not talking about like the Steelers where you have some guys who can make plays, you just don't put them in position to. We were talking about the Patriots where your running back one is Ramondre Stevenson, good back, but he's not popping off 80-yard runs unless the line gives them to him. And then, I don't even want to think about that receiving core. That's a guy where
I'm just gonna say I think he's a guy that makes your offense look better than it really is, makes your quarterback look better than it really is. Which is
like that's a guy if your QB builds chemistry with him, that's all you need. They could just go an entire game with 14 targets out. Don't want to throw out the Antonio Brown thing again, but you could throw the ball to him 14 times a game and he'll probably come down with 12 of them if you have the chemistry built.
Right, exactly. You gotta give it time to work, and you gotta have the quarterback that has that ability. It could happen.
Like no Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a special thing. Yeah, exactly. Just quickly, I know we're starting to run out of time now, but in the edge class, I want to talk about edge and cornerbacks. So we'll do this very quickly. Edge guys, one that you think is the most likely to not be super successful, and one that you think is the most likely to be successful. Who would you say?
Least likely to be successful. And a lot of people like this guy. I've seen him going in front of Will Anderson a little bit. It's Tyree Wilson. He's a guy where I see the appeal, but I don't see the top 10. I don't see even top 20. He doesn't have the burst off the line, which is, I think, a bit scary for someone who's as athletic as he is. And you don't need to go watch a full game to see what I'm talking about. If you look up his highlights, let me know how he gets sacks, because it is either he's not getting blocked on the backside, which, it's not easy to make that play from the backside. You see TJ Watt make it. That is not an easy play to make. I don't want to discredit that. But if you look at the way he wins, it's not getting blocked off the backside, and it's stunts. And if you're taking an edge rusher in the top 10, I think he better be able to win on his own accord, because that's just not going to be sustainable in the NFL. They're not going to let you run in free. They're better at picking up stunts. If I had to call a guy that I think will succeed other than Will Anderson, I'm going to throw Nolan Smith out there. That guy's, they say he's a coach on the field. He's got ridiculous contact balance. He's twitchy. That's a guy who might succeed even more at middle linebacker.
I was just going to say, the argument that we would have about Nolan Smith is where to play him. But maybe you don't choose; you just play him wherever you line him up. But I think I would say that he has the possibility of being the best inside linebacker, not only in this class but for several years. And I think he'd be a good edge player. And it's like, but that's different for different teams. What Micah Parsons does is different than what TJ Watt does. But they're both dangerous players, when used correctly. And I feel like Nolan Smith can do some of what both of those guys could do. And some things either one of them can do. Actually, he's better against the run than, in terms of an off-ball linebacker play, than either one of those guys. TJ Watt is very good against the run when he's chasing from the backside. He's awesome. But he's not necessarily a guy who's going to work his way through blockers and make a form tackle on an outside run play. It's not his forte.
Yeah, if he doesn't get the inside swim, then the cornerback's got to make a tough play out there.
Yeah, exactly. Like, sorry, guy. Yeah, I'm on my way to the quarterback. For me, I would say Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame is probably the guy that I have the least excitement about as far as his NFL career. I don't think he's a bad player, but I think edge is a position where you can have a nice college career, but if you don't really have some kind of like outlier tool in your toolbox, it can be hard to succeed. He's not really someone who's going to put his hand in the ground and be a dynamic 4-3, defensive end. And I don't think he's got the movement skills of an outside, 3-4 edge. So I worry a little bit about him. He looked at the Senior Bowl. He was the guy that came in with a lot of height and just had trouble beating anybody in the rotation. So all those tackles that he was facing have different strong suits and weaknesses, and he couldn't figure out a way to really best any of them. So that's a concern to me. And the testing was not that great. Ade Adebawore, I think, is a guy that I saw him mocked. That the Brugler mark, he went like, what did he go, like 11 or something?
Yeah, I think so.
And I'm like, yeah, like I would have taken him. He'd be one of the few edge guys, along with maybe Will McDonald, that I would, put the stamp of approval on if you want to take him in the first round. but I just feel like I think as an edge, he's a first round guy, but he has skills to maybe once again. Like Nolan Smith, you don't look at him as necessarily either an off-ball linebacker or an edge player. You don't look at him as necessarily just a defensive tackle or as an edge player. I think he's somebody that you can use if you're intelligent and you're not, say, the Washington Commanders, who like to take players and put them in neat little boxes, like their running back who ran a 4.3 and was a wide receiver who they never have on the field on third down. So yeah, if you're willing to put the players in position, I think they can do great stuff. Lastly, on this subject, cornerbacks, it seems like the opposite problem is wide receiver. There's a lot of really good guys, like really good guys. So it isn't as if, if you don't get one or two that you might as well just wait till the fifth round. It's more like it runs out at some point of guys that you would really, really like. But, who in this group do you think is a sort of like arrow is up and who is arrow down for you?
So Christian Gonzalez is a guy that, a lot of people have started to come around to him as cornerback one. I know both of us think he's a generational guy, and that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but I think he's one of the two generational guys in this draft. Like athletes like Jalen Carter don't come around at D tackle, and corners like Christian Gonzalez don't come around for at least 10 years. He's 20 years old on draft day. He is a freak athlete for the position. Then he has the ball skills to back it up. People are always talking
about cornerbacks' hips. He has hips that you just can't see. You can't teach that, and you can't find it even in really good players at that position. Sorry,
the way my high school coach went to Jalen Ramsey's pro day, and the way he described it is you couldn't hear his cleats hitting the ground. His feet were so light that you couldn't hear it, and that just looks how Christian Gonzalez plays. But he's been one for a lot of guys. So a guy that I'll bring up is Julius Brents. Me and you are also both high on him. Yeah. He is the number 4 best tester ever, I believe, at cornerback. And he is, the size goes into that RAS score and all that. However, at 6'2", 202, he looks like he could play in a slot. He looks like he could be perfectly fine one-on-one outside. He looks like he could play safety. He's a guy whose hips are really smooth, but he's just so physical. His technique's great. He's comfortable in trail. He's comfortable in bail. He's just a guy who's just really good. He can play anywhere. That's a guy that I really like. And, this is the guy that I liked before everyone liked him a lot. But now I think my arrow's pointing down a little just in comparison to everyone is Devin Witherspoon. I liked him when, I'm looking at the Steelers mock drafts back in, November. And I'm like, man, I'd love to get a guy like Devin Witherspoon at 47, but back when he was in the 60s on the big boards. But I feel like I'm an insane patient when I see him going top 10 and I see people talking about him in the same breath as Christian Gonzalez. Devin Witherspoon, we didn't get official reports of his testing because it was his own private pro day. But regardless of what the 40 number says, there are many clips on film where he's getting outran on crossers. He's getting outran on goes, and he has to play behind. And what I think makes me nervous is, there's times where he just gets beat in a foot race, but there's other times where he's just getting beat at the line, and he just can't really close the distance. And for a guy who's already a little undersized, he's only 180 pounds. He's more of a one-year guy. His film was solid in 2021, but it was not first round. So for a guy who's kind of coming around, he's physical. The hits are great. You love a guy like that. You want a guy like that on your team. But for a top 10 cornerback, that's one where I really don't see it. I like him in the 30 to 40 range, but anything before 20 just is a bit rich to me.
It's a bit like playing on the defensive secondary that he played this year in college. It's sort of like evaluating players at Alabama, where they're just surrounded at Georgia. They're surrounded by so much talent that is like, well, is it them? Are they the talent that is surrounding the other guys, or are they surrounded by a bunch of guys who are amazing? And in this case, it's like I think he showed some great stuff, and he was a part of an amazing defense. But yeah, it's a little bit easier to cover your flaws when you've got, it's other players in the secondary. Like they had like 4 other guys in the secondary are all going to get drafted. So that's a tough evaluation if you're not 100% sold. I guess I would say just to wrap it up, because Julius Brents is a guy that I most definitely like. I'm a little bit soft compared to most people on Deonte Banks, the corner from Maryland, and it's just I got into this like, every time I mention something about him, to me, he looks what I would say I used to say in the old days, like stiff, like he's so jacked that he doesn't look fluid to me as an athlete. Like you compare him to someone like Christian Gonzalez, like it's night and
Mhm.
day. They're different athletes completely. And not to say that he can't be successful with that body type, but people are like, he's not stiff, he's this and that, the other. And I'm just like, I watch that guy and I think he, in a straight line, when he gets moving, he's impressive and he can come downhill and hit guys because he's built like a safety. But he doesn't strike me as the same kind of fluidity or length as some of these other guys that we like a little bit more. And then the one corner that we haven't really mentioned here that I know you like as well. That once again, it's sort of mysterious to me how he just gets pushed down and down the list is DJ Turner from Michigan. Um, he tested out of his mind. I mean, he's like one of those, not just a Feldman freak, he's like a freak among the Feldman freaks. He like ran faster than anybody and had agility drills better than anyone and has some really impressive tape. And also a guy that,
Mhm.
although probably his home will be drift more towards being a slot player, can play on the outside. He was a good outside corner and he's not small compared to some of these other guys who are looked at as being outside corners. So just a guy that I feel like can play and doesn't get quite enough recognition. Before we go to the NFL narratives, you want to hit me with give me your two or three best sleepers, because we're going to do a whole show on sleepers
Okay.
with Bill Carroll coming up here on the next installment of the show. And it's like Bill and you're welcome to come on and join us. The problem is that Bill and I could talk for 3 hours about off the map prospects, so you might have to fight to get a word in. But anyway, give me your sleepers.
So if I've got to pick my three biggest, I'm going to go Colby Sorsdahl, William and Mary tackle. Think about a lot of the stuff I said about Darnell Wright, where the hand usage, the set work. He's just a very technically refined player, and that's not really that common for a guy coming out of, let's say, William and Mary, especially a team that, I mean, they ran the ball 30, 40 times a game a lot of the time,
Yeah.
but he's so good in pass protection that I feel like that, I'm not sure where he goes on draft day. He could even be an undrafted guy, but I think that's going to be a guy who outplays his status a lot. For my next one, I'm going to go Zaire Barnes, Western Michigan linebacker. With this linebacker class, and especially with a lot of college backers, there's so much projection. With the way that the college game is being played, you see these overhang linebackers a lot of the time now where they're not doing what NFL teams ask them to do. Zaire
Yeah.
Barnes is a guy who does what a lot of teams ask him to do. Played a lot more as a Sam in college, where he's probably a Will in the NFL. He's more of a run and chase guy. However, that means he's good at getting off blocks. That's what he has to do a lot at Western Michigan. So he comes in a lot more rounded than a lot of guys. Again, I'm going to hammer down on the weaker positions. AJ Finley, that's a guy I know that we both like a lot, especially in a weak safety class. He's 21 years old. He played fantastic in the All-Star circuit. And his film is good. He's a good tackler. He has good ball skills. He's good at making plays. That's a big trait for a safety. And then he tested well. That's the other thing. A lot of these safeties did not test well. AJ Finley tested well. And that, if I had to pick one guy that, I mean, really nobody's talking about, I haven't even seen one mention of this guy, like, oh, some sleeper you need to see. If I had to pick one guy who could get into round 2 or 3 where people are like, what the hell? I would say it's AJ Finley.
Yeah, especially because of the depth in the safety class not being so good. And he plays in the SEC and he's young. He's got a lot of things going for him that could push him up boards. And I think that's, besides that, he's great. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand how a guy that plays well in the SEC is not overaged and plays at a position that's a important position, but where there isn't a big talent pool. How does a guy like that get lost? Like, it happens every year. But it kind of makes no sense to me. Yeah, you're preempting me a little bit because I have a feature in my annual directional state article every year, which is not just talking about small school players, but also players that are just underrated and around. And one thing I always have every year is like people think I'm going in the 4th round, but I'm actually a top 50 pick or whatever. And AJ Finley would be one of those cats that fits that description pretty well, I think, I'll throw one sleeper in. I'm going to try to keep it to to Power 5 because I'm going to spend so much time tomorrow talking about guys who are like much further off the wagon. How about Chris Braswell, the slot corner from Rutgers, is a guy that I feel like the slot position is one of those positions in the NFL that has gotten more and more and more important. And if you're a Steelers fan and you're watching or listening to this show, you remember when you had Mike Hilton. Mike Hilton did all this stuff. He could rush the passer. He could, play the run game. He could cover a tight end or a slot receiver. He could even drop back in frequently and play safety in the 3 deep. Just a very valuable to have a guy that versatile who's just a good football player and who may, for whatever reason, not be as good at outside corner or safety or whatever, but was really good at doing a little bit of everything from that position. And to me, Braswell he might even be one of the top 2 or 3 best guys in this class at doing that. And then once again, it plays in a Power 5 school. Granted, if you play at Rutgers, it's like you don't exist. It's sort of like playing at Vanderbilt. So it's like, that's really in the Power 5. I forgot them, So he's just his all-around game as a slot player, I think, will really translate to the NFL and what's asked for it. Slot play in the NFL is a bit different. Things happen a little faster, and you are closer to the football than you would be lining up a lot of the times in college. And so if you have that dynamic skill set at 3 levels, it can definitely come in handy. So be that guy. Just before we finish quickly, NFL narratives, we promised you. Let me ask you this. Who do you think is more likely to get moved? Or will they both get moved or neither get moved? Aaron Rodgers, Green Bay to the Jets, or Lamar Jackson, as we recall, has still got a problem. Or I'll even throw Budda Baker in the mix. Like, who's getting moved and who isn't?
So I'm going to say, in order, I'm going to say Budda Baker gets moved first. I think Aaron Rodgers gets that trade that everyone's been hinting at for weeks now, it feels like, to the Jets. And I think Lamar ends up staying with the Ravens. And I'm not sure I'm not sure when he shows up. I'm not sure how much money he's going to have, if he's going to get a contract done or what. I know the Jalen Hurts contract is going to throw a big wrench in that because, they've pretty much successfully made the Watson contract an outlier. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects the Lamar negotiations. But Budda Baker is a guy that I could see getting moved on draft day, especially because it's a weak safety class. I feel like some team's going to want to pull the trigger on that, especially since the asking price sounds like a 2nd or a 3rd. I mean, I don't know about
but it's a contract situation. That's the problem. It's sneaky. Sure, the pick isn't that much, but compensation will be an issue. Apparently, they were described today as being in different universes financially for what the expectations are. He would like to be the highest paid defensive player in the league or something along those lines is what was leaked. So I don't think that's happening.
I think if he's the highest paid safety, I think there's some teams that'll pull the trigger on that.
Even so,
if it's the highest paid,
that's not
that's a lot
either.
of money though. No, it's not. And especially since all these teams spent a lot of their money in free agency. I mean, there's only so many things you can do. But I mean, that's a guy who can play in the slot at an elite level. He can play back deep at an elite level. I think he gets moved on draft day. I think the Jets probably don't get this whole thing done until a bit closer to whenever the deadline's going to end again, because just how these things go. The Packers and Jets are just in a pissing match about, we want a second, and because everyone knows he's going.
Yeah, well, let me put it this way. I almost totally disagree with you. I think the Budda Baker thing may not offer an easy resolution. It might be that he holds out or plays out the deal and then moves, because I just feel like there's not that many teams willing to pay top dollar for safeties, even though the class is weak. It isn't necessarily like one of those things that every team needs a safety and they don't have one. So I think that might be a bit of a soft market. That's just a guess. He could definitely get moved, especially if the asking price is low enough. If what the Cardinals are basically looking to get is to advance their compensatory pick that they would get by losing him as a free agent, and they're just like, hey, if you give us the comp pick a year early, like, he's out. then the deal might be able to happen for somebody. Because also, if you sign him, you get the compensation pick. I think you get the compensatory pick. So it could be that somebody is willing to trade a third and have him come in and play for a year and then let him go and get a third. It's like it's not the worst outcome in the world. Aaron Rodgers' deal, I think, is the most likely one to happen, and I think that the Packers will fold sometime on draft day and get that second round pick. I think the Jets are smart enough to not give up a first round pick for that guy, and they're not in a position where they're so desperate that they're clearly a Super Bowl team if they just had Aaron Rodgers. But I think it's more like if they get him, great, they'll build around it and they'll make it happen. If they don't get him, they'll continue on this path that they're on. And it's just the hang up to this point, the way I understand it, and I heard it from an inside person, is just the Jets are dead set on not sending a first, and the Packers have been saying that they won't do anything less than a first. So I think when it comes right down to it, the Packers need to move him. And if they, I think they feel like if they get something for him, it's a bonus, because otherwise he could retire and they won't get anything for him.
Yeah.
Lamar Jackson thing is it's the ugliest one. I don't really see any team stepping up to trade for him, and I don't see him playing there again. It's like they're stuck. That one is like, that could go on for a while, man, because he could pull Le'Veon Bell and just not play this year. That would not be in his from his negotiating standpoint. I don't think that's the worst thing. I feel like it's not a smart thing necessarily financially to do, but it probably gets him to some other team. And if his goal really is to get to some other team and get guaranteed money to make his point, then the best way to accomplish that is to be a hardliner, So, and it's another year he can't get knocked out before the end of the season if he sits out.
Yeah.
So there's that. Anyway, I just feel like the Ravens are done with him, and he's kind of done with them. So, man, I would be shocked. Out of all those three things, I'd be shocked if the outcome of any of them is that Lamar Jackson plays another snap for the Ravens. I feel like that is done.
I was on the same train as you until the OBJ signing, because those two were FaceTiming on Instagram Live the night after, and they're not saying anything, but it definitely gives the impression that OBJ signed there to play with Lamar, and OBJ and Lamar have been in contact. So, can you believe
the money they paid OBJ? That's
oh my
sanity,
God,
man. That's like that felt like a desperate. That felt like Kobe Bryant buying the world's largest diamond ring for his wife.
Yeah.
So I think they're trying, but man, OBJ also better come with $400 million guaranteed, or you're probably not going to get that deal done. All right. Final thought for you before we move on.
No, I think I'm good.
All right. You and your bathrobe. It's like a Playboy mansion over there, except for the scenery is not as interesting. At any rate, Korey Karbowsky, you'll be with us again later this week. So last night we did Steelers draft needs. Tonight we talked about the kind of the top end of the draft, overrated, underrated, and some other general draft notes. Tomorrow we have a special guest, Bill Carroll, with us. He is a HBCU scout, and also somebody that's much like after my own heart, someone who is a small school and off the radar prospect kind of guy. So he and I are going to do our annual sift through some of the lesser known prospects in this class that we can get all nerded out about. And I will also be revealing this year's the 2023 Bradshaw to Ben Directional State class of undervalued and small school players. So that's something to look forward to tomorrow. And then after that, we're going to re-air our interview with Gannon quarterback Corey Curtis. Oh, actually, neither one of us bothered to mention him, but if we have a number one sleeper in the class, he would clearly be it. That's why he was on the show with us. We're going to re-air that on Thursday, and then Friday we'll be back again with the two of us and Jeremy Coleman doing the Steelers mock draft war room. I think this is the 15th or the 16th annual mock draft war room, and it's always a treat. It's probably our favorite show of the year, and this is Corey's first time. doing it. So it's gonna be fun times. I'm sure there's gonna be some fist fights involved and a lot of disappointment. But other than that, it'll be a good time. Tune in. So thank you for joining us tonight on the PreDraft Extravaganza of the Pittsburgh Steelers show on your SteelerFury.com podcast. On behalf of Korey Karbowsky and Jeremy Coleman and Steel Perch and Bill Carroll and Corey Curtis and the other people that have been with us this week, and for everyone at Steeler Fury, I say thank you for watching and or listening, and we'll catch you tomorrow night with another episode. I am Wil Masisak saying, go get them Steelers in the draft.
Steelers.